And so for me, I'm just really excited because this is an intergenerational panel. And I think Justin touched on this a bit earlier, and also Vishal when we got into our first session. But there's so much value in hearing the wisdom from every group and from each age. And so I think the questions that we have ready are really dynamic, and I'm really hoping to see your visions for the future following this consultation and what we can do to keep the momentum going, to keep building on what we've put here. And so with that, I definitely think it's probably high time to get started. So I really would like to invite the panelists to introduce themselves, to speak about your work in maybe about a minute or 90 seconds.
If you're there, Rebecca, to say a few short words.
Sure. Hi, I'm Rebecca Hamilton. I'm 19 and I'm a climate justice organizer living on unceded Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh territory in what is now known as Vancouver, BC. I've been involved in a variety of different climate justice organizing in the past, and I'm currently part of a group that's reflecting on where we've been and thinking about some next steps for the Canadian youth climate justice movement. And I'm motivated to be a part of the environmental movement because I know that our options for the future are either transformation or devastation, and I feel that there's really no other option to move forward and take responsibility for my place in the world than to do everything I can to create a more just world.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. Sorry, Samia, you take it away.
Oh, sure thing. Thanks. So next up, I'm not sure, Fernando, if you're ready. I'll give you, if you are, please feel free to introduce yourself. I think I saw you.
Hola, ¿sí me escuchan? Hola, sí, creo que tenía un problema con mi audio, pero ya se solucionó. Bueno, hola, yo soy Fernando. Me siento muy honrado de estar aquí hoy. Gracias por esta oportunidad. Vivo en la Ciudad de México, tengo 14 años. Estudio licenciatura en Comunicación y Medios Digitales. Acabo de ser aceptado en la Facultad de Derecho de la UNAM. Y soy activista por los derechos de niñas, niños y adolescentes en contra de la desaparición de personas en México. También formo parte de nuestra cuenta, Niñez Observa, y el noticiero Pensando Fuera de la Caja, que es hecho por y para niños. Es una coproducción de Odin TV y la Escuela de Periodismo para Niñas y Niños. Bueno, un gusto estar aquí hoy. Los saludo y también estoy muy emocionado de platicar aquí con la cámara para hacer un cambio en este mundo y continuar luchando por el medio ambiente. Gracias.
Thank you, Fernando. And can I please ask whoever's mic is muted to please mute your mic? And we also want to ask that our speakers slow down a bit so that our translators can make sure we get your message across. Thank you. So next up, we would love to hear from Zoe. Please introduce yourself.
Thanks, Samia. Hello to everyone, and thank you so much to the organizers for inviting me here today. My name is Zoe Craig Sparrow. I am the Director of Indigenous Rights and Environmental Justice at Justice for Girls, which is a Canadian nonprofit organization. I am an Indigenous young woman who, sorry, can you hear me? I am an Indigenous young woman who was born and raised on the Musqueam Reserve in what is now called Vancouver, Canada. And I'm currently speaking to you from our traditional ancestral unceded territory of the Hunkaminam speaking Musqueam peoples, where my ancestors have stewarded and cared for the land and Fraser River estuary for over 10,000 years. I speak to you today as someone who is intimately familiar with the impacts of climate change on Indigenous peoples and children, and someone who really believes and has firsthand experience in the power of youth activism, which is why I'm so happy to be here with all of you today and learning from all the youth. A bit about myself. My personal activism journey began at the age of 12 during my first internship with Justice for Girls, and I quickly learned that children's rights depend on a safe and clean and healthy environment and a stable climate. So then at the age of 15, I did an internship another one with Justice for Girls and the David Suzuki Foundation, which led to me traveling to Geneva to speak to the Committee on the Rights of the Child about Canada's failures to protect my rights as a child and our planet. Since then, I've co-authored and provided help on numerous different submissions to international human rights bodies. And today I am a 23-year-old young woman. I'm now pursuing my PhD in human rights and working to address the disproportionate impact of climate change on children, Indigenous peoples, and women. And most importantly, I think, to stand beside young people as they fight for their rights and the future of the planet. So thanks so much for having me. Heichka.
Thanks so much, Zoe, for your introduction. It's a pleasure to have you here. I'm going to give one moment so that we can mute our microphones before I ask our next speaker to come on. Okay, I think we're good to go. So next up, I want to invite Andrea to please come forward and introduce yourself.
Hello, I'm Andrea Rogers, and I'm an attorney. I'm joining you today from Seattle, Washington. I'm senior litigation attorney with Our Children's Trust, and I'm so thankful to be joining all of you today, wherever you may be. I represent young people in climate change cases against their governments, and we take a fundamental rights-based approach to litigation. So we challenge government conduct that affirmatively infringes the fundamental rights of youth by causing climate change. We represent diverse youth from all over the country in the United States as well as in Canada. I know Albert was one of our clients in the LaRose case, has coordinated some of the panels and facilitated some of the panels. He's one of our plaintiffs, and also in other countries as well. And we seek science-based systemic remedies to the climate crisis. And you know, it's been pretty remarkable the summer that we have experienced. And the challenge that we face is actually getting into the courtroom. You know, very little of the work that we do is about, you know, convincing people climate change is real or, you know, the impacts that people are experiencing. We are trying to get these young people into the courthouse doors so they can share their stories and the political branches of government can be held accountable for the actions that they take knowingly that cause climate change. So it's a struggle that I've been working on for over a decade of my life. We're seeing some improvements in courts around the world. The US is in the very bottom. And I think as the big dog in terms of emissions, we have a lot to do in United States courtrooms. So we're very fortunate to be coordinating with lawyers around the world as we need the support to move the US forward particularly. So I'm really grateful and excited to hear from everyone else on the panel today. Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much, Andrea. I think all of your work sounds very exciting to me, so I can't wait to get into this more. Next up, I want to invite Colin to please introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening. My name is Colin Vernon. I'm the co-founder of Slow Factory Foundation. And I guess as a starter, so I'm in what is now called New York, that is Lenapehoking, traditionally. And I've grown up in what is traditionally Mohawk territory in Southern Ontario, and come to New York over 10 years ago. And then Slow Factory is really founded around what is now thankfully becoming a clear and popular idea that there is a inextricable intersection between climate justice and human rights, racial justice, and social justice. And we've been dealing with this topic for around a decade. And at first, it was really difficult even to kind of start this kind of conversation in many places. Slow Factory's work is based in the fashion industry. We use fashion as a vehicle for social and environmental change. And the reason is because first, everyone has to participate in some way in fashion because we're not allowed not to legally. You can't walk around naked. But also because it's such a massive industry, has such a horrible environmental and social effects around the world, relies a lot on historical international colonialism, and also touches so many other industries from agriculture, transportation, logistics, all kind of finance, excuse me. It has a really, really broad impact. And what we do is really bringing together different voices and positions from political, we've worked in different kind of ways with the United Nations, to large industry partners, to social activists and advocates, and youth and grassroots movements, and really bringing so that we're having the same conversation and trying to push the entire industry forward to have a more positive and less exploitative effect. So that's a quick intro. I will save, I think, some of the work that we do for as we dive into the panel, but I'm really honored to be here with all of you, and loving the intergenerational approach. It's something that I always love to do.
Thank you, Colin, and for those comments as well. I think, or if anyone's on Instagram, you've probably come across the Slow Factory post. So it's really cool to see you on here, and definitely excited to keep moving. And so we'll also next up have Clarence. Please come to the floor and introduce yourself.
Samia, unfortunately, I think we may not have Clarence yet. He is still trying, as I believe it, but he may be having some difficulty connecting. Clarence is in Samoa, and we did try to make contact with him during the panel on Thursday, which was unsuccessful, and we're trying again now. So fingers crossed.
Okay, thanks for that, Sean. We'll see if we can get Clarence on later. So last but not least, I want to invite David. Please let us know and introduce yourself.
Hello, everybody. David Boyd coming to you live from Pender Island, Sadeas, in the Salish Sea, which is traditional Coast Salish territory. I'm the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Human Rights and the Environment, and I've been an environmental activist for 30 years, largely because I fell in love with nature when I was a little boy growing up in the Rocky Mountains. And I'm still deeply in love with nature. And I think one of the things about being an environmental activist is that we live in a world of wounds. I mean, we are all painfully aware of the decline of nature in today's world. But the flip side of that is we live in a world of wonders. And I think this is something that I really want to emphasize in my conversations with young people, that we can gain inspiration and rejuvenation by spending time in nature. And I mean, I know that most of us live in cities, but even in cities, there are parks, there are birds, there are bugs, there are all kinds of things. And, you know, here where I live this spring, we found a hummingbird nest in a tree just beside our house. And, you know, we watched every day these eggs that the mother so lovingly sat on. And then eventually they hatched, and every day we would check them out from these tiny, tiny little creatures that grew, and now we're feeding those hummingbirds at a feeder just outside the window here. Similarly, there's whales that swim past our island during the summer months, and it's just so amazing. I've been out in my kayak and had a giant male killer whale surface literally 5 feet in front of me, so I could see the drops of water rolling down its back as it emerged from the ocean. I mean, it's enough to stop your heart, right? So I'm happy to say that I've survived those experiences, but I really want to emphasize that the beauty and wonder of the natural world is something that we all share and that we can all benefit from. And so, you know, my job as a professor at the University of British Columbia, but my volunteer role with the United Nations is all about climate justice, environmental justice, making sure that everyone on this planet has the right to live in a safe, clean, healthy, and sustainable environment, which is of just fundamental importance for everyone, but especially young people. And so that's why I'm part of the Children's Environmental Rights Initiative with Sean and Samia and a bunch of other people who are part of this consultation. This is, as you probably know, this is the third regional consultation after a fantastic one we had in Bogota, Colombia 2 years ago, and then another one in Indonesia. And it's just amazing to feel the passion and the energy and the wisdom coming from young people. So I'm really excited to hear about the manifesto you've been working on, and then to help you bring it from paper to reality. So thanks for having me here. I'm super grateful.
Thanks so much, David, for bringing that in for us. I think now we're probably ready to get going. So I'm going to pass the torch to Sean to lead us into the next part of the session.
Thank you, Samia. And I think David summed it up there about the passion and the energy of young people to bring forward solutions, ideas, and really drive that window open for our leaders to take the types of actions we need to fulfill the right to a healthy environment for children and young people around the world. Guys, we have some complex questions to put to you, but we also have to ask that maybe you try to keep your answers short, as we don't have a whole lot of time. And as David said, we do intend to launch the manifesto that all of our young people and the adults participating have worked on in their pod sessions throughout the last 3 days. So without any further ado, I might first turn to you. We know that we have to change our societies fundamentally, but we also know that not everything that's good for the planet is good for people. And as we've seen with the pandemic, rushed action or emergency measures that are taken under duress can actually exacerbate inequality or make things worse. How do you feel we need to take the steps that we need to take without making people's lives more difficult or making people suffer in the process?
Thanks, Sean. That's a big question, but it's a really important one, I think, because it contributes to our need to understand and mitigate the intersectional barriers and rights violations experienced by our most vulnerable populations. So we're now facing the reality where those whose lives and rights are most impacted and threatened by the climate crisis, Indigenous peoples, children and women, people of color, are those who are at the forefront of activism, rights defense, and social change. So for me, I'm an Indigenous young woman, and so I look at the experiences of Indigenous girls who face vulnerabilities associated not only with their indigeneity and gender, but also their age. So for Indigenous girls, climate change intensifies the intergenerational harms of colonization and genocide already suffered, including, widespread poverty, dislocation and removal from traditional territories and lands, loss of culture, racialized sexual and physical violence, disappearances and murders of Indigenous women and girls. So my activism and research actually over the past few years has focused on the relationship between, that really inherent relationship actually between genocide and ecocide. So for those of you who don't know, ecocide is a form of genocide, which looks at how the extensive damage to or destruction of the ecosystem or the environment, whether or not caused by humans, if it changes the land so much so that it affects people's abilities to peacefully enjoy and live in that territory, that's called an ecocide. So I echo the concerns of many Indigenous women and girls around the world when I say that violence against the earth and violence against Indigenous women and girls is going hand in hand. So we're seeing the ecocidal impacts of environmental degradation and, the extraction industries going hand in hand and being closely linked to the genocide of Indigenous women and girls. So a prime example of this is in my country, Canada, which is currently home to the largest and most destructive oil operations in the world, where we're also having a genocide of Indigenous women and girls, where I, as an Indigenous woman, am 12 times more likely to go missing or be murdered. So all this is to say that in considering that rushed action may exasperate inequalities and marginalization, the reality is that the risk of inaction is more dangerous. We need Can you hear me now? Good, okay. We need urgent action to save the planet and prevent ecocide, but also to prevent and mitigate the genocides and rights violations currently taking place. So the key really here, I think, is that, you know, to transition out of this climate crisis and to have a healthy environment, we need to fully protect and realize Indigenous peoples, women's and children's rights, and vice versa. And I think on that note, just to close, the reality is that Indigenous peoples and children have already developed sustainable solutions and have answers to these questions. So as far as I'm concerned, you know, the time for planning is over. It's time to follow their leadership and listen to their solutions. And, you know, as we look to the future of the environmental movement, I encourage all of us to take a more Indigenous approach to life, stewardship, and future that, you know, as was discussed this morning, considers future generations, you know, plans for the next 7 generations, and portrays humans as stewards of the land, where we don't own the land or the earth. It doesn't belong to us. We belong to it, and we have a responsibility to take care for that land for the future generations to come. So hopefully that answers the question. Thank you.
Thank you, Zoe. It's a big question, you're right. And I think what you're saying is rights-based approaches and incorporating traditional and Indigenous knowledge will get us a long way to making sure that we change in a way that protects people and protects our world. Samia, I'll pass back over to you if you're good with that.
Yes, thanks, Sean, for that. And I just wanted to take a second and reflect on your comment, Zoe, because I found a lot of parallels with an intervention we had yesterday from Amelia during our intersectionality panel. And you just both really touched on the fact of, you know, gender and being a woman or being a girl, and how that layers on with some of these difficulties and vulnerabilities to climate change. But at the same time, that Indigenous women and other women are the knowledge holders and have the leadership to bring these solutions that we already know of. And so I just really want to emphasize that point, and I thank you for bringing that to the table. And so now I want to shift gears and ask a question to Colin. Often as consumers, we find that what is healthy for us and the planet is also more expensive than mass-produced, unethical, unhealthy, and polluting products. And so this in itself is an injustice, and it means that positive environmental actions are sometimes only available to those who can afford it. And this is a particular issue for children and young people who may not have control over what they consume. And so, Colin, could you speak to us about what you've learned at the Slow Factory and about how to make what's good for people and the planet accessible to everyone?
Also a big question. I love this question. You know why I love this question? Because it's the most common question that we get, basically. Anyone thinking particularly in fashion, but about products, about consumption, really what the question is to rephrase it like at the root of it. This question is, how do I, as an individualist consumer capitalist, participate in the individualistic consumer capitalistic system and having my purchasing have a slightly less terrible effect on people and planet? And like, for me, stepping back, and it's the wrong question. I think it's a great question because everyone thinks about it. They're like, my individual choice today and my dollars, where do I put it? How do I make it less bad and less terrible and less genocidal? And how do I not support these terrible systems? But it's not really about that. One, we know the cost of things. The true cost of products are not properly represented in the price you're going to pay. So it's false to be like, this mass-produced T-shirt is actually cheaper because, you know, as we know, someone else is paying that cost. It's the environment, it's the people, they're inseparable. We're part of the nature. That's, I think, thankfully starting to be kind of a known concept, that the $5 T-shirt it didn't cost less, and actually it cost overall humanity and the planet maybe more than the $50 T-shirt or the $100 T-shirt. But bigger than that, it's the systems. It's not about the individualistic capitalist choice within there. That's, you're a grain of sand on a beach. You're not moving the shape of the beach. It's the bulldozers that are shaping the shape of the beach. And it serves the people who drive the bulldozers, if you'll go with the metaphor, it serves them for all the little grains of sand to think about how their actions are causing this and that, and how big the difference is. If you really want to be having a better effect, and you're making a choice that you're like, I'm going to save up and get one $50 T-shirt, because honestly, a T-shirt but like the resources, everything should cost $50, should cost 100. I don't know the exact number, but just to say it should be way, way more, because the cost is very high. growing cotton, weaving, for example, cotton, weaving, like it's crazy how much effort and resource go into making a t-shirt. But if you're on the fence and you're like, do I get one $50 t-shirt or three $25 t-shirts so I can still fit in society and not have other criticisms on me and whatever, you're not the problem. If you can't, you know what I mean? If you have to go, if you're going to Target and getting the $5 t-shirts instead of one $50 studio designer t-shirt that is recycled, whatever, you're not the problem. We know. Not only is it that 100 companies cause 96% of all the greenhouse gas emissions ever since ever produced by humanity. Not only do we know that, recently, sorry, mini parenthesis, when I'm throwing out statistics, I may get them a little bit wrong. Please, whenever anyone on a panel throws out a statistic, go check it and double check it and triple check it. Don't just parrot it back. But anyway, you'll get the point. There's an Oxfam 2015 study that's like 10% of the richest population produces over 50% of the greenhouse gas and environmental emissions. The top 1% produces more than double of the bottom 50% of wealth. Your wealth and position and structural position speak exponentially more to your footprint than your actual individual choices. So yes, make better individual choices. Yes, for sure, save up and like get more locally produced, for sure more expensive, the better quality things that will last longer, eat better food, eat less meat, everything. Do it all. Okay, yes. But know that no matter what, this is insignificant compared to the impact of the bulldozers, of the US military is the biggest polluter in the entire world. Empire is alive. The Roman Empire, the ancestor, the children of the Roman Empire are still alive, in the English Empire, in the British Empire, in the American Empire. It's all there, and don't please feel terrible that like, okay, now I'm going to Target, I'm going to whatever because like I can't afford this designer $50, $100 t-shirt, whatever, because like, yes, okay, it all adds up. But no, you're not really the core problem. The core problem is systemic, and the core problem is about global colonialism, and the core problem is about white supremacy. The core problem is about individualistic consumer capitalism, putting the blame back on you rather than looking for systemic solutions. So that's why we at Slow Factory, in conclusion, that's why we at Slow Factory push to try and bridge and work with large corporations where a tiny change and bigger changes is going to make a massive impact. Like it's the scale is the problem a lot of the time. So looking at where things can, small actions can make big differences, it's in the leverage that happens working with really large organizations and having those organizations make better decisions and have those organizations be held accountable. So what we do is magnify the voices, the outrage, the consumer perception that is the only one of the only levers we have to the global robber barons of corporations that are basically running the planet and basically destroying the planet. And that's one of the things that we always want to do. And these are the voices that we want to hear. And everything that we're talking about comes back to making enough noise and making that it has to push separately. It's not you and your individual choices. Like, yes, make better choices as good as you can, but don't feel bad for going and buying fast fashion because you're just a person. It's a systemic problem, and keep pointing to a systemic solution in governments and corporations.
Wow, thank you so much, Colin, for that. I think I could feel the energy and just really appreciating that reminder, especially I feel this audience being a lot of youth and young people and a lot of things we see on social media, trends and whatnot, and we might feel guilty participating in this. And also just in terms of means and having agency over their choices. And so I think that's an important reminder and an important beacon and vision that the change we look for is systemic and it's radical and it's transforming the ways that we've had this globalized supply chain. And, you know, that doesn't account for the life cycle of items and all of the energy and resources and labor, and most importantly, human labor that goes into it and valuing things appropriately. So I really appreciate those comments. And I think now In another light, and in an equally interesting and important way, I want to point this question to Andrea. And it's about the law. And so we know the law offers us a powerful bulwark against environmental injustice, but this requires equal access to justice and the ability to go to court if your rights are violated, which is often a problem for poor or marginalized communities, and even more so for children and young people in those communities. So we want to ask what lessons have been learned from the Our Children's Trust case as to how access to environmental justice could be improved, and could the right to a healthy environment be of help in this context? Thanks, Andrea.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here, and it's such an excellent question. And boy, I wish I had the answer,
Andrea, excuse me,
yeah?
I hate to interrupt, I'm sorry, but we could just, a small request from our translators for the speakers to just slow the pace a touch, because there's big concepts being put across.
Yes, absolutely. It's always the lawyer that's the problem in things like these. So, for reasons I will never understand, I find I am like David, how he described earlier about being incredibly connected to the natural environment. But US courts really fail to recognize the connection between the environment and human life. And because of that, most US courts have universally rejected the notion that there's some sort of fundamental right to an environment. Federal courts in particular have never been able to make that connection. And even US courts in jurisdictions, some states have a right to an environment codified in state constitutions. Even in that circumstance, courts have often taken extraordinary measures to restrict court access and leave the right unchecked in the hands of the political branches to do with as they please, essentially. So as you know, with climate change, we're facing the greatest environmental threat the world has ever known. And still, as the wildfires blanket our west, we've been baking in unprecedented temperatures, people literally dying because of these extreme conditions that we've experienced within the last few weeks. Many courts continue to believe that political branches have full discretion to take us over the cliff. And this is often done at the behest of government attorneys who are seeking to protect the governmental institution as opposed to the rights of the people. So it goes without saying, and I think with this audience, you will agree that that is wrong. That is not just, and we have to work to turn this judicial ship around. And that's really the basis for the work that we do representing youth at Our Children's Trust. And I just wanted to make a couple of points about what I think is the most important with respect to access to justice in this realm. First, I think recognition of a fundamental right to a clean environment is the most important step we can take in combating the climate crisis. Without acknowledging that there's fundamental rights at stake, we will never get out of this crisis. When the US Supreme Court declared that segregation in public schools is unconstitutional, that declaration of rights meant something and changed the course of history. Second, science must be used to inform the contours of the right. Judges often struggle with the right to an environment because they think it can't be measured and they don't understand where to draw the constitutional line. I've had a judge reject the notion of an environmental right and compare it to the right to world peace. And he couldn't understand how the two were different. So I think advocates must address that problem head on and articulate the right in a way that can be informed by science. And I think Judge Aiken in the Juliana litigation did this very well when she framed the right as the right to a climate system capable of sustaining human life. Climate stability is a scientific concept governed by restoring Earth's energy balance, and that can be measured, and that science can be provided to the court. I want to emphasize that the right should not be defined by political compromise, like by allowing 2 degrees or 1.5 degrees of warming. Those levels of warming are catastrophic. The IPCC recognizes that they're not safe, particularly for those most vulnerable to the effects of climate change. So those should not be used as a proxy to define what is a protection with respect to the right. Finally, work must be done to ensure that the right is accessible and enforceable in court. I think it depends in part on how the right is framed. Never use language like adequate provision shall be made by law. That just means that the political branches have full discretion to take action to destroy the right. There's other sort of dangerous phrases you want to avoid. But it also depends on depoliticizing our political system and our judicial system. We need judges who decide cases based on evidence, scientific evidence, and not on ideology. And I think, what's critical and what inspires me about this event is, there has to be a movement to garner public support for the recognition of the right. And I think that's exactly what's happening here today, and people that work like David's work as well. And that is just critical so that we have the right not just to secure an environmental world in which we can sustain human life, but for our children and generations to come. So, we're seeing some movement on this front, but there's so much more to be done. And as I said earlier, courts are very far behind, and we have a lot of work to do in terms of educating them on the value and intent of the fundamental right. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea, for all of that perspective. I think it's important, especially in just in the efforts to be accessible to youth and to just people who are not familiar with the judicial system or the legal system, to break things down in this way. And I think it was extremely helpful to hear it broken down that way into what's necessary for something to really be protected, to avoid language being misconstrued, interpreted in all kinds of interesting, funky ways. And so I think that was really important. And one of the things that just really stuck out to me was your comment about evidence. I think that is extremely important. And we've had that comment come up many times with youth in our pod sessions, just really explaining their frustration with knowing that the climate science is there, the knowledge is there, indigenous teachings and ways, and that they're just truly being ignored at this point for political motivations, for money, and whatever else it may be. So I do think that's a great reminder to us, and also a way to get us thinking about how we want to see things put down in our laws and what we need policymakers to do and our judicial system to do to really protect us. So thank you for that contribution. And now for another question, and I also just want to add in another reminder. I think that your pace in answering that was really great and probably very helpful for our translators. I just want to remind us to keep speaking in a way that is paced for our translators. And also a note that we will be hearing from our youth towards the later half of the session. Right now, we've heard from some of our older panelists, and just get ready for them. They'll be up next. So for our next question, though, I'll be directing this to David. And I want to invite you to please speak on the importance of this push and this global momentum to have the human right to a healthy environment recognized universally. We want to know, what would that mean for young people in North America, and how the right to a healthy environment can be constructed or written in a way or supported in a way that makes sure young people's environmental struggles are supported. So hopefully you have that question. If you need me to clarify, please don't hesitate.
Well, that's a terrific question, Samia. Thank you. And despite being very passionate about this and also fueled by caffeine, I will endeavor to speak slowly today. So the right to a healthy environment is such a powerful tool. And that's why, I worked for 15 years as an environmental lawyer, struggling in Canada, and then switched to being a human rights and environment lawyer, because I realized that if you look back over the course of human history, human rights have been such a catalyst for transformative change. Whether you think about the way that abolitionists used human rights to bring about the end of slavery, the way that the suffragettes movement used human rights to bring about equality for women. And so here we are in this global environmental crisis where government after government have made commitments to protect the environment. 190 countries are parties to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. 190 governments are parties to the Convention on Biological Diversity, both of which date back to 1992. And so almost 3 decades later, governments all around the world have failed to fulfill the commitments they made under those critically important international environmental treaties. But when we bring human, and the fundamental problem with those environmental treaties is that they have no enforcement mechanisms. Nobody can go to a court and say, Canada hasn't followed its commitment under the Framework Convention on Climate Change. And so human rights bring that accountability into the equation. And this is super important because around the world today, children, youth, environmental activists, indigenous people, human rights activists are using their rights to hold governments accountable to their environmental commitments. We've seen this in the Netherlands, in France, in Germany, in Colombia, in Costa Rica, all of these countries where promises have been made, promises have been broken, and now by using human rights, we are able to force governments to keep their word, to fulfill their commitments. So in a sense, thinking back to what Colin was talking about, when we have to fight the bulldozer, one of the most powerful tools in our repertoire to fight the bulldozer is human rights. And I think it's really important for everyone to understand that most countries in the world already recognize that everyone has the right to a healthy environment. Over 150 countries around the world, but not Canada and not the United States. And this, as a Canadian, this is deeply embarrassing to me, but this is something that we're working on. And so there is a bill before Parliament in Canada that would strengthen our main environmental law and for the first time recognize the right to a healthy environment. We need all young people and everyone to push the government to make that bill a reality. Similarly, in the United States, there's a new proposal for a bill called the Environmental Justice for All Act, which you mentioned on Thursday, Samia. That is a really beautiful piece of potential legislation, but we have to push to get it passed. And then once those laws are enacted, then we can see people use those tools. And that's what's so exciting about what's happening all over the world is that, for example, in Costa Rica, a 10-year-old child wrote a letter to the court saying, someone's dumping garbage in my community. And the Constitutional Court of Costa Rica said, that's a violation of your right to a healthy environment, made the government stop that dumping. In Colombia, a group of 25 children and youth went to court and said, the deforestation in the Amazon is a violation of our right to a healthy environment. The Supreme Court of Colombia said, you're absolutely right. A group of children and youth in Germany went to the Constitutional Court and said, Germany's not doing enough to address the climate emergency. And the Constitutional Court said, yes, Germany has to do more, has to do that faster. And so we really have the evidence that when you recognize the right to a healthy environment in any country, it results in stronger laws, better implementation of those laws, more accountability, reductions in environmental injustice. And so, for example, in Argentina, a group of people in the most polluted neighborhood in Buenos Aires, Argentina, were able to use their rights to clean up a watershed that has been one of the most polluted watersheds in all of South America for decades. But now that they have that tool, that power, that right, they can use that right to change the world. And so I really welcome everybody to join this movement for a universal, global right to a healthy environment, recognized by every country in the world, so that we can use that tool to hold governments accountable to change the systems, from renewable energy, from fossil fuel energy to renewable energy, from a linear economy to a circular economy, from an economy that's based on human rights exploitation to one that respects and treats all workers fairly. And that's the future that I'm so excited about working with you, Samia, and all of you on this call today. So thank you for the work that you're doing. And I really, as I said earlier, super excited to hear about the manifesto.
Thank you, David, and ditto. I'm getting even more giddy, you know, the closer we get to this. I feel like I'm anticipating it. I'm really excited to see. So I have to say that for me as well. And I just wanted to really pin down the point you made of just how this recognition of the human right to a healthy environment is the groundwork, the basis for environmental justice to be achievable. And I think that just really hits home because we have this assumption, and probably that Andrea can even speak to, just being involved in the legal system where, you know, how can we understand or mutually value environment, human life, labor, and all of these other things, our homes, our environments, nature, if we don't recognize that we all have a right to live and breathe and drink and play on it. And so I really love how that sounds. And I also really value the points you bring up about youth actually taking these things into their own hands, finding issue, and actually following through and seeking relief and seeking justice for themselves. And I hope that serves as a motivation, as a model that no one is too small or you know, too young to really take charge into what you care about in your communities. And so I want to urge everyone to believe in yourself and to be active and to work in community with fellow young people and our elders to get those things done. And so at this point, I want to pass it back to Sean so he can lead us through our last panelist.
Actually, Samia, some good news. By the way, we're saving the best for last in terms of our young people. We're bringing forward Rebecca and Fernando at the end. But Samia, we have got, I believe Clarence is now on the line, so you might get to ask him his question.
That's wonderful. Okay, I think so. We have Clarence here. And Clarence, because you weren't with us earlier when we started the session, we asked each panelist to introduce themselves and to speak about your work. So please, if you can hear us or you're with us, please feel free to come on and introduce yourself, and then we'll have a question for you.
Thank you very much. And I'm so glad to be able to join this morning. Can you hear me clearly? Excellent. Well, good morning to the panel and good morning to the group. My name is Clarence Nelson. I am from Samoa, which some of you may know is a small island in the South Pacific. And I am a member of the United Nations Committee on the Rights of the Child. And I'm so thrilled to be able to join you. I tried on Friday, but it didn't work out. But I'm happy to be here and, you know, to tell you a bit about the work of the committee and how excited we are to be working on a new general comment on the environment. So at the appropriate time, I will be happy to make an intervention. Thank you, Samia.
Thank you, Clarence. It's a pleasure to have you. I'm glad we had you. I was a little sad on the first day when we couldn't have you on. So it's great to have you here with us. So let's get into our question for you. So we've heard very recently that the Committee on the Rights of the Child took a decision to develop a general comment on children's rights and the environment with a special focus on climate change. So could you perhaps explain to us what the Committee on the Rights of the Child is and what the significance of this decision has for us?
All right. Well, firstly, just a very brief background. Of course, the Committee on the Rights of the Child implements the Convention on the Rights of the Child, and the Convention has many rights: political, social, economic, cultural. But one of the rights it does have is a right to a healthy environment, and it talks about freedom from pollution, freedom from loss of biodiversity, etc. And this is what we usually use to advise states about when we do their concluding observations. But the real initiative that we are very excited about now, and we've been building to it for a number of years, we had a day of general discussion in the committee in 2016. And that has led us to this point today, where the committee has now decided to take a further step and that is to do a general comment. Now, a general comment, for those of you who are not familiar with it, a general comment is a document that we give to states, and it's designed to guide them, to help them implement the rights in the convention. For example, in this case, a right to a healthy environment with a particular focus on climate change. And we are hoping that using this general comment and talking about the right to a healthy environment and issues of climate change, and recommending to states how perhaps they could take administrative and legislative and other kinds of measures to address climate change. Because, you know, we're doing climate change, just a further background, because the children, it's the children of the world, have been telling us this is what we think is very, very important. And I come from a region where all I need to do is go down to the seashore and I see climate change. We in the Pacific are living in an era of climate change. It's not a theoretical exercise. And it's not a theoretical exercise in other parts of the world as well, where environments are being degraded. So this is a very, very important and fundamental issue from the point of the view of the committee. And that is why we have decided to do this general comment. And we are hoping to complete it in 2022, and maybe realistically 2023, but we are targeting next year in order to be able to issue this general comment. But a lot of things have to fall into place because there is an extensive consultation process that needs to happen. And we also need to obtain a lot of assistance from various groups around the world. So it takes a lot of coordination, a lot of planning. But we're very excited by it. And I personally, as a Pacific person, are very excited about it. So that's what I wanted to share with you as being the latest development that the committee is undertaking. Thank you, Samia.
Thank you so much, Clarence. I think it's very refreshing and important to hear perspective coming from the Pacific here, because we acknowledge that there are so many different regions involved in North America, and that it is important to decenter this perspective of just, you know, certain countries, for example, the United States or whatever it may be, having primacy over these discussions on climate change and human rights. And so I think it's very important to acknowledge that and to give that support to people who are currently experiencing the impacts of climate change. And so with that, I thank you for that. And I think all of the panelists have been able to speak to so far. I want to pass the torch over to Sean to take it on for our youth panelists.
Thank you, Samia, and thank you to all of our panelists so far. Like I mentioned, we wanted to give our youth panelists the final word in this, so I'll go to Rebecca first and then to Fernando. And Rebecca, we've been hearing a lot about rights-based approaches, evidence-based approaches, the need to incorporate local and traditional knowledge. But emotions are a very important aspect of the struggle for environmental rights. And you know, it's easy to get down given the intensity of our environmental catastrophes. But we're all here because we hold on to a hope that things can change for the better. What do you think are the key opportunities for the youth climate movement to seize in the coming months and years to build on that hope and accelerate change?
Thank you. And yeah, also just want to say that I'm so honored to be speaking with everyone who's spoken so far. And I basically want to echo everything that's been said. Thank you for everybody who shared such amazing perspectives. And yeah, so I really appreciate the naming of the importance of emotions. For a long time, the primarily white mainstream climate movement has focused on climate change as a rational scientific problem to be managed through improved reduction targets and better technology. But this narrative ignores the interconnected root causes of the climate crisis. And we know that most people in the world are not experiencing the climate crisis anymore through a slide deck that's explaining increased CO2 in the atmosphere. This has been especially apparent over the last few days, with a steady litany of horrific climate disasters happening all over the world. where I live in Vancouver, over 700 people were killed by a heat dome that was caused by increased temperatures. And the grief of that is really the story of the climate crisis right now. Similarly, there's been horrific flooding in Europe, and the forest fire season has sparked sooner and more aggressively than ever where I live, burning the village of Lytton to the ground. So people seem to understand the severity of the moment that we're in. The last few days have felt like a bit of a turning point, and yet I know I felt a little bit overwhelmed watching all of this, partly because of the lack of commiserate action from our government. In the midst of this destruction, my province's government, which supposedly has the best climate plan in the country, has recently decided to take climate action by joining forces with Shell Canada, the oil company responsible for much of the devastation that we're now facing. So they're joining forces with this company to fund research into technology that will prolong our dependence on fossil fuels, basically. So focusing on carbon capture and storage instead of transitioning off of fossil fuels urgency. We also recently found out that our government, the BC government, has given more money to the fossil fuel industry than they have to fighting the climate crisis in the last year. So this gaslighting, our government saying that they are taking climate action that meets the level of urgency that we see, but not in any way doing that, is being called the new climate denialism, and it's the problem that we need to fight. In the face of such obvious catastrophe, the urgency of the problem is increasingly clear to the public, and now we have the opportunity to put forward the solutions we need by getting clear about who is to blame, calling out half solutions, and pulling everybody into a united movement to shift who gets to decide what our future will look like. Because the climate crisis is not a benign tragedy of human nature. There are people who are criminally responsible. Our country's living here was built on the genocide of Indigenous people, and colonization violently imposed the myth of separation between our human society and the environment. And this foundation of violent extraction never went away. We live in an economy that is organized around exploiting land and people globally to create massive amounts of wealth for a very small group of people in the global north. But we're not going to survive unless our economy is instead organized around managing our shared resources to meet the needs of every single person. But we know this isn't the priority of our government. In addition to what the BC government has been doing, the Canadian government also created a secretive pandemic recovery committee composed of the CEOs of all the major oil companies in Canada. And they met nearly weekly at the beginning of the pandemic with key elected representatives, successfully lobbying to the federal government to keep their dying companies on artificial life support by funneling over $18 billion of public resources to the fossil fuel industry in 2020. These are resources that could go towards creating good jobs that compensate people fairly and that could go towards enriching communities. We know that COVID has worsened existing racial, economic, gender, and other inequalities, shedding more light on the violent, uneven foundation our society was based on. During the pandemic, the wealth of global billionaires increased by $3.9 trillion, while at the same time, over 53% of Canadians are within $200 of not being able to cover bills and debt payments. Clearly, the power dynamics in our society are not working. And we can see that it's the same dynamics that are making our lives and the climate increasingly unstable. And in this moment, we can see that the last era of economic and political power has failed us. We deserve a world where people and the planet come before corporate profits. And so now we have the opportunity to come together and create what comes next. For a really long time, the debate about climate has been stifled by the question of whether the climate crisis exists, and also by focusing on these not exciting, not emotions-based, market-based technocratic solutions. So like talking about the carbon taxes. But the actual solutions to meet this crisis need to be significantly more integrated into every part of our world. Every person deserves accessible and sustainable transportation. Every person deserves a safe and affordable home that doesn't produce massive amounts of emissions. And Indigenous people deserve land back. People in power are telling us that these visions are unrealistic and insurmountable. But this is because we lack a public imagination about coming together to do something big. But as I think the last few days have shown us, is there are so many people who are doing the work in our communities to shift power and come together. And so I know I feel more hope about the possibility of putting forward the solutions that we need. And we can see lots of exciting organizing happening. For example, the Sunrise Movement in the US has been fighting for a civilian climate corps. Millions of people are out of work post-pandemic, and there's so much work that needs to be done to transition our society off of fossil fuels. So the Sunrise Movement has been fighting for a solution that brings those things together by asking for guaranteed work for people and putting them to work, retrofitting buildings, and also transitioning infrastructure to be more resilient in the face of climate catastrophe. And so this is an example of really exciting community organizing for solutions. And there's so many more opportunities ahead. In Canada, we have a federal election coming up, which is an opportunity to hold parties accountable and demand real solutions instead of this new climate denialism. And similarly, the next global climate strike is happening on September 24th. And it's an opportunity to create real action by uniting around the shared values of improving life, working together with all different parts of society for a more equitable distribution of resources. Because ultimately, all of our movements have more in common than they do that separates us. So overall, I have hope because I know that we have more people on our side, if only we can show that. There are those of us who are committed to living in safe, caring, and healthy communities for as long as possible. And then there's the small group of people who are content watching from space as the world burns. And so if we talk to our neighbors and we talk to our family members and we talk to our little siblings and our friends about the moment that we're in right now, and spin visions of the world that we deserve to live in together, we can create it. And especially because the pandemic has shown us how much we need each other. And coming out of so many months of separation, we're craving deep connection with other people. And what more meaningful way to be together than working to create a more caring world for everyone? So I'm really excited about all the work that we're all going to do going forward. I'm excited to see the manifesto. Yeah. Thank you.
Rebecca, thank you for such a powerful intervention and such an honest one. It's what we all need. So thank you. We're running low on time, so I'm going to move straight to Fernando. In Mexico, I just give the translators a heads up that Fernando will be answering in Spanish. And I'd just like to share a short story with you that might be of interest. I had the pleasure of working on the Paris negotiations the year and a half before the Paris Agreement. We were working with a small group of people to get human rights into the Paris Agreement. As David says, human rights is a very transformative catalyst for change. And at the 11th hour, the countries removed human rights and gender equality and a number of other people-centered provisions from the text entirely, in an effort to get a deal over the line. And it wasn't, we possibly would have lost it completely if it wasn't for Ambassador Luis de Alba, Mexican ambassador to the negotiation process, who rallied civil society and many others to make sure that we have human rights in the text of the Paris Agreement. So we have Mexico to thank in big part for the existence of human rights in the Paris Agreement. So I'll turn to you, Fernando, and just ask you to pick up on the point Rebecca mentioned numerous times, the inequalities both within countries but also across countries that cause such challenges in responding to a crisis like the climate crisis or any other environmental crisis. Could you speak to the importance of understanding the perspectives of people fighting for environmental justice in countries other than our own, and how we need to get better at building alliances across borders. Thank you, Fernando.
Por supuesto, ¿me escuchan bien? Perfecto. Bueno, pues durante los 5 años de activismo social que llevo, he aprendido que los derechos humanos y la defensa ambiental están interconectados. No puede haber uno sin el otro. En ese tiempo he tomado conciencia de la gravedad del problema ambiental y de la importancia de que cada uno de los seres humanos se involucre para juntos solucionarlo. Ahora, quisiera hablar acerca de la importancia de tomar acción, como mencionó Rebeca, la importancia de tomar acción y que no se queden en las palabras. Porque muchas veces muchos países o personas solo firman acuerdos internacionales y solo hablan acerca de que se tiene que combatir este problema y no se hace nada. Entonces, se requiere acción, se requieren políticas públicas eficaces que en verdad combatan este problema. Y se requiere que las niñas, niños y adolescentes se encuentren dentro y trabajen justo en esas políticas. Se requieren redes. Eso es a lo que quiero llegar. Se requieren redes de personas y activistas y organizaciones que trabajen juntos para luchar contra los problemas con los que nos enfrentamos, entre ellos el cambio climático. Porque para comprender la importancia de las diferentes perspectivas de las personas que luchan contra el cambio climático, primero se tiene que celebrar que todos somos diferentes. Y eso está muy bien. Nuestras diferencias nos enriquecen y fortalecen. Me gusta hacer la analogía del cuerpo humano. Cada parte del cuerpo humano es importantísima. Cada una tiene una función vital. Pensemos, por ejemplo, en el cerebro, el corazón, los pulmones, etc. Así, cada miembro de una red ambiental global posee una importancia vital en la justicia climática. Al trabajar en red, vemos que confluyen diferentes actores, que pueden ser instituciones, grupos, organizaciones, coaliciones, activistas. Y en ese sentido, cada punto de vista es importante. Cada aporte debe ser escuchado con respeto e interés. E incluso las diferentes posturas se valen. Y para llegar a acuerdos se debe mantener una actitud de apertura, de innovación y de ánimo de construir un mundo mejor. Se tiene que estar consciente de que al trabajar en alianzas se crean redes que permiten la diversidad. Es un trabajo perfecto para la comunicación intergeneracional y el intercambio de saberes transnacionales. Pongo, por ejemplo, el ejemplo de Nuestra Voz Cuenta, de la que soy partícipe. Nuestra Voz Cuenta es una red de 50 niñas, niños y adolescentes y jóvenes de toda América Latina y el Caribe que luchamos por nuestros derechos. Nos reunimos, nos autoorganizamos y participamos en webinars en los que exigimos que se cumplan nuestras demandas por los derechos de la infancia y por nuestra seguridad, nuestra salud y todo lo que tiene que ver con nosotros. Por ello, en estas redes lo que hacemos es un diálogo que nos permite conocer, que nos permite ampliar nuestras perspectivas y ampliar nuestros saberes para así generar acción. Por ello, considero que es de gran importancia que existan estas redes, que estén a disposición y que trabajen en conjunto y de una manera intergeneracional. Porque a pesar de lo que muchos dicen, las niñas, niños y adolescentes estamos conscientes de nuestra realidad. Estamos conscientes de lo que vivimos, estamos conscientes de todo lo que sucede, nos enteramos y también queremos cambiarlo. Por ello, creo que juntos, como sociedad, tenemos que exigir que se creen acciones y que si no se cumplen, nosotros como sociedad también exijamos que esto pare, que se cumplan correctamente las acciones que se proponen. Por eso creo que las redes son tan importantes. Pienso que crear una red es una gran manera de que en un movimiento medioambiental abramos nuestros corazones, compartamos nuestros saberes, nuestros avances científicos, tecnológicos, ambientales. Tenemos que abrir nuestras mentes y estar dispuestos a aprender, desaprender y reaprender, dialogar, pero sobre todo escuchar. Escuchar con atención, sin juzgar, sin prejuicios, analizar e interiorizar lo que aprendemos. Y como red, actuar cada uno en su especialidad, en su localidad, en su ámbito e influencia. También mantener esa sensibilidad, inteligencia y creatividad abierta de cada miembro de la red para apoyarnos, impulsarnos y escucharnos, porque juntos somos más fuertes. Finalmente, quiero recordarles que esta red ambiental tiene que incluir a niñas, niños y adolescentes. Nada acerca de nosotros sin nosotros, y eso incluye el movimiento ambiental. Tómenos en cuenta, porque no les vamos a fallar. Vamos a aprender, trabajar y, claro, tal vez nos equivoquemos, pero vamos a rectificar, porque somos agentes de cambio aquí y ahora. Nos preocupa y nos ocupa el medio ambiente. Y por eso nos comprometemos a continuar participando en estos diálogos intergeneracionales para cambiar el mundo. Muchas gracias por esta oportunidad. Me siento muy honrado y no les vamos a fallar. Gracias.
I feel honored listening to you, Fernando. Thank you very much for that. It's very important just to highlight some of those points you touched on, the listening without prejudice, the agency of young people to transform the world, and the value of networks. And hopefully that's something that this event can leave behind as a network. So thank you to all of our panelists. I'll pass back to Samia, who will bring us into the next section.
Thanks, John. And just to reiterate, thank you so much, Fernando, for that intervention. I think I also held on to that point about listening without prejudice, but that also our differences and our diversity makes us stronger in our coalitions and when we work together. So thank you for that. And thanks as well to Zoe, Colin, Andrea, David, Clarence. I appreciate all of your inputs on this panel. And I hope that this has helped give us, like we were talking about, an imagination and to change the way we consider the climate crisis and these injustices, but to instead look at all of this as opportunities for community, for growth, for learning, for nurturing and care, and just for relearning ourselves and our relationships with each other and nature. So I appreciate all of your contributions, and I've definitely learned a lot. So now I want to pass the mic to our other MC, to Justin, and he will bring us in with our next folks and introduce eventually our Phoenix Manifesto.
Wow, I feel absolutely inspired. I have to be honest, I really did not know what today was going to be about. I did not know. Sitting here listening and really connecting and feeling the words that have been shared, the expression, the passion, the energy, the drive, the willingness to learn and grow. Man, I am so grateful to be here today. Miigwech, I say in my language, thank you so kindly for all the knowledge that has been shared, for the willingness to create, connect, and build. You know, we talk about changing the world. Man, I love that idea. I totally believe any human being has the ability to change the world. You know, and you talk about networking, connecting, bringing together. I love that idea. We're in this together. This is our little blue planet floating through a gigantic space. We're all on this little tiny planet doing this beautiful work. Man, thank you so much for allowing me to be a part of this, to witness. It just gives me so much more passion and drive to want to do more, to learn more. You know, one of the things that I love to do, I work with youth. I'm a youth worker. I've been a youth worker for 10 years. I do speaking and I create space for youth to express themselves. I love voice. I love action. I'm so inspired by folks that just really speak what they say and do what they say. You know, that idea of I'm doing this, this is how I'm doing it. I think that is so amazing. You know, as a speaker, one time somebody asked me, they said, Justin, do you inspire people to stand up against the pipelines in BC? And I said, you know, actually, I don't. I don't inspire people to stand against the pipelines. What I do is I do my best to inspire them to believe in themselves, to love themselves, to create that passion within them for whatever it is that they want in their life, to bring their gift to life, whether that is standing against pipelines or creating pipeline, whatever it is that they want to do. That's who I am. I love to inspire that voice so that we could speak it, we could walk it, we can keep on keeping on with it. But I feel so much inspiration from being here. Miigwech, I just wanted to say those kind of words now. What an event. Man, I can't believe I missed the first 3 days, but I'm so glad I'm catching this day. Oh my goodness. All right, okay, back to the show. Sorry about that. I just had to say those kind of things. Whew. So, I'm gonna take a breath here for a second. What a gift. All right. So here we go. Next up, we're going to be doing because oh my goodness, I'm flustered. I feel flustered. Like this is just, I'm just so proud of you all. I feel so honored to be here. It's like almost making me emotional to hear so many good things and have so many good people gather. And you know, our planet needs us. It's just we need each other. Like-minded people, birds of feather flock together. Man, I'm really enjoying being a part of this flock today. Thank you. Okay, sorry. Okay. So we're going to be doing we're going to be getting to, we're all going to be part of the Phoenix Manifesto. I'm so excited about hearing what what that's about and how that's come together to fruition. So we're going to be sharing that. But first of all, I'd like to invite Nadine to come in, and she'll be sharing now. So Nadine, are you here with us?
Hello, and Miigwech, my brother Justin, thank you for your beautiful sharing and for your vulnerability and being willing to share your emotional response to this with us. So much gratitude. I think, you know, we all hopefully will be able to feel in those ways after today's, well, the past 4 days of the beautiful time we've spent together. So just would like to say good afternoon and thank you to our stellar panelists for sharing with us here today. For the panelists, my pronouns are she, her, and I live on unceded Lenni Lenape land in what's currently known as Pennsylvania. It is my absolute honor and privilege to introduce the first formal draft of the Phoenix Manifesto. We'll be reading it in English with translations available via audio and in versions that will be sent out after this. So first, I'm going to pop a link in the chat for everyone, so you can pull it up on your computers, and then I will share my screen as well. Here we go. So this is it. This document was co-created by all of the young people here in this consultation. And it's a beautiful testament to the sheer power of youth to reimagine a future that's rooted in justice, in love, and in service to both people and planet. As a youth climate activist myself, I'm blown away by the community we've built here, and I'm so grateful for all of your energy these last 4 days. Over the course of the consultation, participants across generations met in pod groups for what now totals a few hours. In that time, they wrote hundreds of pages of in-depth responses on shared Google Docs to guiding questions and participated in over 10 different Padlet sessions, which is an innovative learning tool for co-creation and for collaboration. Our team has pulled directly from the thoughts and the recommendations of young people to bring together the most key reflections echoed throughout the last 4 days. Youth engagement in the policy process is critical. We must raise our voices, share our stories, and open the hearts of many as one. These past few days, we learned, we felt, we shared, and we contemplated our vision for a shared future that honors our Mother Earth's right to sustained well-being and children's right to flourish on a healthy planet. I was particularly moved by the ecocentric, ecofeminist lenses that were woven throughout the Spanish pod reflections and the ease of which everyone discussed complex emotions and things like decolonization. It's become clear that the youth living here on Turtle Island are ready to step up and lead us into an intersectional future where we once again live in right relationship and reciprocity as caretakers of our planet. In the coming days, we will have fully translated versions of the Phoenix Manifesto available. And it's my hope that the power of this consultation stretches far beyond just these 4 days. I hope you can use this document and our reflections from this consultation to actively create change in your communities and to lead humanity back home into heart-centered ways of being. So just a big thank you to all the participants for your presence and for your commitment to a more just, sustainable future. Let's stay connected. This is only the beginning. And without further ado, I will figure out how to screen share so we can show you what the manifesto looks like. All right. So here's our cover. And I'll start with the list of our collective demands. So the first one is address the following demands through the lens of intersectionality. The second is commit to the rights of health and well-being of both people and nature. Shift economic metrics of success from GDP to eco-psychosocial well-being of people and nature. Strengthen and broaden environmental education. Use proactive, preventative policymaking. Defend the sacred through ecocentric and ecofeminist policy. Acknowledge eco-anxiety as an emergent mental health crisis and create adequate systems of support. Decolonize policymaking, societal institutions, and respect diverse forms of knowledge. Support self-determination of Indigenous people and center Indigenous knowledge. Support the flourishing and diversity of localized social and environmental ecosystems. Call for accountability for harm against both ecosystems and communities. Prioritize youth empowerment and meaningful, sustained intergenerational partnership. Protect activists. Ensure accessibility for all. And lastly, reframe reform as reimagination. And there you have it. I'm going to pass it back to Justin and Samia.
Beautiful. What a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful document. Oh my God, it's just so profound. Thank you, Nadine. One of the things I just want to interject here is this idea I keep hearing about this Indigenous knowledge. What I truly love about being Indigenous is that idea that we put the children at the center of all that we do. It's old knowledge, is that idea that the children are at the center of all that we do. You know, a long time ago, whenever they would move the camp or they would start preparing for different, it was always the children at the center. of all the ideas and plans and things that we would do. So that's beautiful. It's talking about 7 generations ahead and 7 generations behind. That's so beautiful to see. So I'd like to next invite our
We're going to be asking Sophia. And for the last part of your name, please excuse me, but Castrejon Ponce de Leon. Sophia, please, if you're going to read in Spanish.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So I read in Spanish, right? Abordar las siguientes demandas a través de la perspectiva de la interseccionalidad, comprometerse con los derechos de salud y bienestar tanto de las personas como de la naturaleza, cambiar las métricas económicas de éxito de PIB, Producto Interno Bruto, por bienestar psicosocial de las personas y la naturaleza, fortalecer y ampliar la educación ambiental, utilizar la formulación de políticas preventivas y proactivas, defender lo sagrado a través de una política ecocéntrica y ecofeminista, reconocer la ecoansiedad como una crisis de salud mental emergente y crear sistemas de apoyo adecuados, decolonizar la formulación de políticas, las instituciones sociales y las diversas formas respetadas de conocimiento, apoyar la autodeterminación de los pueblos indígenas y el centro del conocimiento indígena, apoyar el florecimiento y la diversidad de ecosistemas sociales y ambientes localizados, pedir responsabilizar por los daños a los ecosistemas y las comunidades a los responsables, priorizar el empoderamiento de los jóvenes y la colaboración y asociación intergeneracional significativa y extensiva, proteger a los activistas, garantizar la accesibilidad para todos, reimaginar, reinventar y replantear las reformas.
Thank you very much. That was so beautiful to hear your language. So what a beautiful voice, beautiful language you have. Thank you for that. Samia, would you like to introduce the next one?
Yes, I just want to make sure that I have the right name for our second speaker, but I believe our second speaker's name is Martha Pitre. In French, please.
That's totally right. I'm gonna just wait a moment for the interpreters to switch to French. Allô, je m'appelle Martha. Je vous joins aujourd'hui des terres traditionnelles non cédées du peuple Mi'kma'ki, maintenant connu sous le nom de Sackville au Nouveau-Brunswick, au Canada. Voici les exigences du manifeste du Phénix. Répondre aux demandes suivantes à travers le prisme de l'intersectionnalité. S'engager à respecter les droits à la santé et au bien-être des personnes et de la nature. Déplacer les mesures économiques du succès du PIB vers le bien-être éco-psychosocial des personnes et de la nature. Renforcer et élargir l'éducation à l'environnement. Adopter des politiques proactives et préventives. Défendre le sacré par une politique écocentrique et écoféministe. Reconnaître l'éco-anxiété comme une crise de santé mentale émergente et créer des systèmes de soutien adéquats. Décoloniser l'élaboration des politiques, les institutions sociétales et respecter les diverses formes de connaissances. Soutenir l'autodétermination des peuples indigènes et centrer le savoir indigène. Soutenir l'épanouissement et la diversité des écosystèmes sociaux et environnementaux localisés. Demander des comptes pour les dommages causés aux écosystèmes et aux communautés. Donner la priorité et l'autonomisation des jeunes et à l'action intergénérationnelle en s'attaquant aux processus centrés sur les adultes. Protéger les activistes. Garantir l'accessibilité pour tous. Recadrer la réforme comme une réimagination. Merci.